Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on your time zone. This is Allison Pena with Worldwide ERC. Thanks to everyone for connecting, and welcome to today's webinar program, Remobilizing a Global Workforce, sponsored by Server Worldwide Relocation and Moving. Before we begin, please take a moment to review Worldwide ERC's webinar disclaimer. And now I would like to go over a few housekeeping announcements. If you are experiencing technical difficulties joining the WebEx session today, please dial 65617-5554 from Singapore. You can find global help phone numbers at support.webex.com, or you can always email questions to support@webex.com. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. If you have a question during the presentation, you may submit it online at any time. To submit your question, please use the Q&A tab, which is located in the lower right-hand portion of your screen. Simply click on the tab and type your question into the dialog box at the bottom of the screen, and then click the Send button. All questions selected will be answered publicly. An email containing a link to the course evaluation and information on accessing the handout and recording of the session will go out later. Please be on the lookout for it. It will come to you from messenger@webex.com. During this webinar, we will be polling the audience at times. When a poll is opened, it will appear in the polling dialog box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen below the Q&A box. The question will appear in both the slide and polling dialog box. Simply select your answer and click Submit. You will have approximately 1 minute per question to submit your answers. The results will display in the same dialog box once the poll is closed. This webinar is worth 1 CRP and 1 GMS credit. If you are a GMS seeking CE credit for this webinar, you must include the name and date of this event on your GMS renewal application at the time you apply for recertification. The renewal application is available online. If you hold your CRP designation, credit will be added to your record internally within about 10 days. Attendees must be individually registered and logged in for the majority of the event to receive credit. The archived webinar session will be available to all for the next month and available to Worldwide ERC members for the second month. After 2 months, our Premier Learning Platform subscribers can continue to view this session for up to 2 years. CRPs who log in and view the archived session will also receive credit automatically upon completion of the session. Credit processing fees for webinars are no longer collected. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenter. Kathy Burrows with Serva has had more than 25 years of experience in global relocation, real estate, and account management. As Director of Global Advisory Services, Kathy works with current and potential clients to ensure that their mobility programs are providing the support and governance necessary to align with defined organizational and talent objectives and priorities. Her experience provides a depth of knowledge that enables her to blend talent management, program governance, and mobility objectives with operations excellence to support a client's vision of mobility support. She has been a 2-time recipient of Serva's Leadership Award in Client-Centric Performance. Kathy holds both the CRP and SGMS designations from Worldwide ERC and is excited to be receiving ERC's Meritorious Service Award in 2020. Thank you all for joining us today. I will now turn the program over to Kathy.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As we look at our topic today, some of you may be thinking, why are we talking about remobilization now? We're still trying to figure out immigration issues, tax issues, trying to get people out of parking locations, getting individuals back to their home locations. We have a lot of firefighting that we're still doing. Why should we be talking about remobilization now? And the reality is some organizations are already starting to remobilize some of their workforce. Some of that remobilization may be domestic moves, some of it may be cross-border moves, but some organizations are moving forward, and it's really important that you start thinking about your strategy. So for today, we're going to take a look at how we can prepare you for that. And the takeaways that we'd like to have you walk away with are some strategies to better align your mobility program structure with some organizational changes that you might be seeing with your company, give you some keys to evaluating readiness for mobilizing employees, and give you some guidelines and best practices to help you design a strategy that will help move forward with the initiatives that your organization has. We're going to start today by taking a first polling question. We'd like to know, has your organization started to remobilize talent? Yes, we've started moving people domestically only. Yes, we have been starting to move people globally only. Yes, we've started moving talent globally and domestically. No, we have not started moving people. And the last choice would be unsure as far as the population that you're moving. So if you can take a minute and answer that polling question, we will move forward to really look at the 4 criteria that you want to consider when deciding whether you were ready to remobilize with your program. And it really comes down to the business readiness to accept talent in the new location, your employees' readiness to remobilize, the mobility team's readiness to support remobilization, and the locations that you're moving people to, are they ready to support remobilization activities as well? And when you take a look at these 4 pieces together, you can get some really good information to go back into your organization and strategize with your businesses as far as whether they are ready to prepare to move talent. So Allison, do we have any results yet from our poll? We have. Give it a few minutes to come back to us. We'll continue to move forward then. So let's take it the first one. Oh, there we go, Allison, thank you. So we have, most of us have started to move people domestically and global, which is great. And then we have the next group of people, let's see, we've got 25% are not moving individuals, and we have 45% are moving both domestic and global. So it's awesome to see that we have a kind of a split a little bit where almost half of our group is moving folks, and a percentage of people have not started to move fully with their programs. Okay, great, thank you for that. So when we look at business readiness, we're really looking at 2 lenses here as far as travel considerations and destination considerations. So for your organization, you need to understand if there are any existing travel bans. It may be a worldwide ban, it may be a regional ban, it may be a country ban, but you need to understand what the rules are within your organization to have people travel physically. And there may be different rules than that were in place before COVID-19. So you'll need to understand the rules. There may be different rules for how many days you need to book ahead of time for connecting flights. So be really cognizant of how those rules might have been changed. And then also there may be additional approvals necessary to validate that someone can travel for company travel or for relocation. And then when looking at your destination locations, we need to look at facility readiness. If you're ready to move someone to a new location, is that location really ready to receive that person in that location? For example, is the building open? Can they go and work in the building? Is there additional modifications to the building that have to be done before employees can come back and work in the building? Those things need to be assessed and could impact timelines as far as relocations. It could be important as far as critical moves. And so if there are facility restrictions, that will need to be communicated back to the business because it will impact critical moves that are going to a new location. You also want to take a look at the departments that are critical for onboarding activities. Things like supporting payroll, insurance, getting badges, getting computers. If you have new hires coming into a new location, and those critical onboarding activities can't be supported in that location, it may not be the time to move folks into that location from a business readiness perspective. Next, when we look at employee readiness, we're going to look at the employee in 2 lenses. One is family considerations, and one is the employee's personal goals and comfort. So during COVID, we have a lot of folks that have had their moves paused. They've been parked in locations, they've been stranded in locations, they've been repatriated, waiting to see what's going to happen going forward. So the families are going to have some concerns regarding health and safety as far as will they feel comfortable going to the new location or back to the host location? Will they feel comfortable with the access to health care in their destination location? There may be some anxiety or reluctance to move depending upon how COVID-19 has impacted the family, especially if they've had anyone that has become ill or has potentially passed away from COVID-19. There may be more sensitivity to going back on assignment or relocating in general. And then we also have a lot of families really concerned about dependent education. Many children have been trapped in between two different schools and two different locations, working virtually, and families may be concerned about the ability for that location to provide the level of education support that that family needs for that child to move forward. Then when you look at the personal employee themselves, the employee may have had some changes and thoughts as far as how they feel about going on assignment. So is the employee really ready to continue with the assignment or the relocation? And can the work that they need to be done, can it be successfully performed in that destination location? And does the assignment match up with the career goals and the aspirations that the employee had for going on assignment? And has that changed or fluxed depending upon the impact of COVID or the changes within the organization that maybe makes them hesitant about going back on assignment or making the move, or maybe they may have modified their career plans where the relocation or the assignment may not necessarily be in their path for their future within the organization. So depending upon the employees and the family's readiness to relocate, companies may find that alternate relocation approaches may be preferred for that employee. So for example, an employee that's going on assignment or going back on assignment may go in with a phased approach where the family joins later. They may join when they feel more comfortable about what the destination location offers them. They may want to wait for a school break or an end of a school year to make that break to go back with the children into the school. Or if they do have a child that's going to be graduating, some families may choose to stay behind and allow the child to graduate and then come join the employee while on assignment. But then you may have status changes. You may have employees that go on assignment unaccompanied where the family doesn't join them at all, and then benefits packages will need to be modified. You may also find that the package gets changed where it may have been a long-term assignment for 3 years that's turned into a short-term assignment, or a long-term assignment that may only be 18 months. You may find projects are deferred. The purpose for the employee going on assignment may be postponed for a year, and then we just close out the assignment and then revisit it in a year. You may find that the move is canceled, or unfortunately, you may find that the employee is made redundant and then the move is just irrelevant at that point. For our second polling question today, we'd like some insight into how your mobility team has been impacted. So this is for our organizations that have mobility teams that move, not for the vendors, but looking at your teams, have you had a reduction in the number of team members that support your program? Have you had to add team members to your program? Have you had additional responsibilities placed on your mobility team to support the organization as a result of COVID? Or have you had no changes and no impact to your team? So we'll give you a few minutes to take a look at that question. And then we'll take a look here at the next piece of mobility readiness, which is the mobility team themselves. And I think we all recognize that COVID-19 has really provided an opportunity for mobility teams to show their competence and the value that they can provide the organization. And so with this in mind, it's really important that mobility teams take the time now to take a look at how ready are they to support mobility when it goes back to the way it used to be, where we have a lot of moves coming forward and we're remobilized. There may be new processes, there may be new people on the team, and we really want to make sure that there's no gaps in how we're providing services to the organization. So it really takes a minute to take a look at your team from the perspective of capabilities and capacity, best practices, and team check-ins. So from capabilities and capacities, taking a look at the team members that you have you lost any team members? Have you gained any team members? What is the scope of support that you're providing? Has it changed? The teams that you have in place, are they able to provide that support for you and for the organization? Potentially, maybe you have to provide some additional training for your team or some additional materials. And just making sure that they have the right resources so that when the volume does start to push through your program again, that they can really support the program well and succeed for you. It's checking in with your team to see how they're doing. Some of them may be very stressed out and burned out from all the effort that they've been providing the organization to keep track of all of your employees that have had to either park, move, or repatriate, and handling all the problems that have come up with immigration and tax and additional services. So it's really important to also make sure that they're taking advantage of time off and to decompress so that they have enough, that they are in a good space to take on the additional work that they're going to need to take on when you do remobilize. And then when you're looking at best practices for your team, it's just ensuring you're doing all the things that you should be doing. And the first one is really communicating and making sure that your team is communicating frequently with all the stakeholders within your organization to alleviate any miscommunications and challenges and concerns that they may have about processes and changes, because the reality is that so many things are fluid within mobility right now that communication is really key. There may also be changes on your team where different people are doing different services. So it'll be really important that that's communicated out to your organization so that there's no confusion within when certain activities are needed to be started or there are questions that are asked. So clearly defining roles, who's on your team, what they're doing, and making sure the right people know about that. And then that way, that'll give you a really good way to make sure that your team is successful. When we look at our polling questions here, we had 39% have had no impact to their teams. We have 27% have had additional responsibilities added on to their teams. And we've had 23% of you have had team members reduced out of your teams as a result of COVID. After you look at your internal mobility team, we need for mobility partners and teams to look at the mobility vendors and partners that support their program. It's important to remember that not only are you working through remobilization, but your mobility partners are as well too. And they may have been impacted by having to reduce staff as well. So the more that you can communicate with them as far as your strategy, the better prepared that they're going to be able to assist you. So when looking at your partners, you want to look at three aspects. You want to look at their staffing, their ability to handle fluctuations of relocation volume, and potential training needs that may be relevant and needed to provide support. So from a staffing perspective is understanding the locations that you're going into. Is your vendor prepared to provide the support that you need when relocations start flowing through the pipeline again? You know, also understanding that services will still probably be delivered in a slightly different manner as each location is still dealing with different nuances of how to provide support either virtually or with social distancing. So again, the better communication that you have up front as far as when you expect volume to come through, they can better prepare for you on their side when it comes to fluctuations in volume. And then from a training perspective, as you all know, there are changes in your processes and your policies and potentially the benefits that each individual is going to be receiving once remobilization starts. So there may be training necessary to convey all those changes to your mobility program, either policies or processes. And your internal partners and external partners will need to be trained. So kind of think of that. It's not just your external vendors. And it will be important that organizations provide clarity regarding the service delivery processes that are different, and particularly when you have multiple strategies that you're supporting. So you may find that you have expansion, you have people that are coming back, and then you may have group moves, and each group has a different process potentially and different benefits. So you want to make sure that those are clearly defined and relayed to your vendors so that they can provide great service for you on the ground. Okay. So once you review, the ability for the business to be ready and the mobility team's readiness, we need to start taking a look at the population. And mobility teams have already been monitoring their demographics regularly. From the beginning of COVID, you've been running reports, you've been finding out where your folks are. You need to continue to do that, but do it with a slightly different lens. So you're going to be looking at your population demographics and your employee mindset. So from a demographic standpoint, it's what you would expect. You're going to take a look at where your employees are located, where they are in the relocation process, what requirements for additional support are needed, and then any additional support that they're going to need that we hadn't planned for or budgeted for, consider that as part of their move, and then reassess the support that the employee is going to be receiving. So for example, if the employee is going to go unaccompanied for the whole assignment or for part of the assignment, make sure we're taking into account those pieces as part of their components of their program. From the employee mindset, you want to confirm the health and safety status of the employee and their families and understand the overall well-being in their mind as far as how they're feeling about going back on assignment or moving. And then understand some of the preferences that the employee may or may not have going into their move of additional support that they might expect. And then understand as well, again, that the family may not be joining immediately and understand how that impacts the support. All of that needs to be kind of taken together and assessed with the business as far as the business need to continue on with that particular relocation or assignment. Is it necessary? Is it critical? Is it still driving the organization the way that we need it to? Taking a look at the cost, matching it up with how the employee feels, and that will need to be done on an individual basis to assess your employees to decide whether or not they should go forward from their perspective and from the business's perspective. So the organization may be ready to start thinking about moving, so it's mobility's job to create the action plan. It's to define the remobilization strategy, apply that strategy to the population assessment that we just reviewed, create tools like decision trees and viability tests to help assess moves as far as whether they move forward or don't move forward, provide updates to your program and your policies, and then provide documentation for those updates. So let's look at these a little bit further, but let's start with our next polling question for the group. Within your organization, what stakeholders are you working with on your remobilization strategy? Are you working with your human resources department and recruiters or talent, business leaders? Are you working with your benefits and comp team? Are you working with your BCP team? Are you working with senior leadership teams? Or are you not part of the strategy team at all as part of your organization, or have you not started to work on your strategy yet? If you could take a look at these questions for a minute, and then we'll come back to them in just a second. So once you understand your organization's priorities and objectives, then you as a mobility team can come back and take a look at how that's going to impact mobility for your organization. Taking a look at the prioritization of critical relocations, taking a look at high-risk situations that need immediate resolutions. That priority and objectives will also help you understand the impact of workforce reductions and how you can support those. Impact will also be from contract deadlines and government and military contracts. If you think about some of our organizations that are governed by some of their business by contracts, COVID-19 doesn't negate many of those contract terms. So they're very keen on getting talent mobilized. So those will play a big part of mobility strategies, as well as expansion plans, whether they continue or they're on hold. You may have competing business lines where one business line is expanding and one business line is contracting, and you need to provide support for both scenarios within the organization. You may also need to make adjustments to destination locations if the organization has decided to change locations. Maybe they're consolidating 3 locations into one. You may find yourselves facilitating group moves as part of that location consolidation. You might also find that duration changes due to organizational changes. So we talked earlier about how a traditional 3-year assignment that was deemed to take 3 years, we're now going to try to complete it in 18 months, or a long-term assignment turns into a short-term assignment. You might find extended business traveler go on a short-term assignment. There may be differing philosophies within an organization, within business lines, that will need to be addressed by mobility. You'll also have particular business lines looking to repatriate employees to contain costs, and also look at ways to adjust changing objectives. They may bring someone back to start a different project, or they may bring someone back as part of a termination as far as reducing work staff. You may also see a reduction in development programs, and development programs have typically taken up a lot of the short-term assignment bandwidth of organizations. And you may have also issues with retention challenges that need to be addressed with your programs. So it's really taking a look at all of this into helping understand how you create your strategy by understanding the different ways that the business is going to ask you to respond to move talent. So let's take a look at our polling question here. We have 42% of organizations are working with business leaders. We have 37% working with human resources. We have senior leadership teams representing 32%, and we have talent, benefits and comp, and a part of like 20 to 30%, and we have 23% of the organization has not been part of a strategy team. But everybody looks like they've started the process, which is good to see. All right. So let's now take a look at applying the population assessment that we have. So once you know the objectives of your organization and you understand the direction they'd like you to go in, mobility teams are going to need to assess the impact of those objectives on their mobility population. So it really starts with the mobility team looking at the changes and understanding if there's going to be a need to change their policies or their processes. They're going to have to take a look at cost containment exercises and see if it's going to impact the benefits that are provided in a program, and are we going to have to modify those? The objectives may cause timelines to flex, and that may impact costs as well. Looking at the population as far as the family and employee considerations, and the morale that folks have as far as all of these things going on. You have COVID-19, you potentially have an organization that may financially not be doing very well, and people may be worried about their jobs, and that all plays into this assessment as well. And again, in many cases, organizations will have multiple strategies going simultaneously. Mobility team really needs to clearly define those different strategies and understand how to facilitate them with their existing program, and if necessary, make the modifications to their processes, policies, and procedures to flex with those needs during these critical times so that they can best support the business. As part of this, it will be up to the mobility team to help identify the readiness of employees, and through tools like decision trees and viability tests, it makes it much easier to look at populations quicker and apply a clear lens of significant qualifiers. And so a lot of times when you're looking at determining whether a relocation should move forward or not, it will come down to business readiness to accept the employee in the destination location. It will be looking at departure and destination location readiness as far as whether you're ready to accept someone and whether you can provide services for them. The ability to travel to that location will be key. Immigration considerations are top of the list as far as whether someone can start to move or not, as well as tax considerations and employee readiness. And I'd like to also highlight that as you're designing these decision trees and viability tests, you may find that some of your mobility partners can be of assistance for you. So for example, when you're looking to gather information about your employees as far as how they're feeling and whether they would be prepared to go back on assignment or relocate, many times you can leverage an RMC who are really well positioned to do a needs assessment to help provide that needs assessment with your employees rather than have your mobility team do that assessment. They can do it a lot quicker, collate the data for you, and provide some efficiencies for you there. Your candidate assessment company can also provide some additional assistance if you need help creating questions. You might be able to use some of their tools or some of their platforms to help you design some questions to better get at some of the key pieces of data that you're looking for to help determine whether someone should or should not go back out on assignment or take the move in general. You can also utilize vendors like your education consultants to help you with critical moves where you may be having challenges convincing the employee to stay on assignment. So for example, if you have an employee that's on assignment that's been parked and you're asking them to go back on assignment and they're worried about education concerns for their child, you can bring in an education consultant to help provide additional guidance for that family. the education consultant can take a look at where the child has been for the last 9 months as far as a curriculum, if they're ahead or behind, if they would stay in their home location or go to the host location, how would their curriculum move forward or be hampered. And then many times the education consultant can give the family a little bit more understanding of where they stand and that they might not be in as bad a spot as they think they are, provide them some tools and some ability to get some additional coaching for the child that would enable that key employee to stay on assignment and then keep your business initiative moving forward. You may also find an education consultant specifically helpful for repatriations, where you're pulling people back mid-school year where the employee may have concerns about the child having fallen behind going back into the home curriculum. And if this particular employee is a strategic person for you, it might be really nice to be able to provide assistance where the education consultant comes in and helps provide an assessment of that child's progress so that as they go back to repatriate when the borders open up, they have a better idea of maybe some additional coaching or some work that they can do ahead of time to help the child catch up ahead of time with their schoolwork. So I think there's some really great ways that you can use vendors to help your decision trees and viability tests that you may not have thought of before. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as you're working through your strategy. I'd like to take us to our next polling question, which is, have you changed your relocation program policies as a result of COVID-19? Have you implemented temporary changes? Have you implemented long-term changes that you see lasting 4 to 18 months? Have you implemented permanent changes? Have you not changed your policies, or are you unsure at this time if you'll make any changes? So if you could take a look at those polling questions, we'll move forward to talk about program updates and changes. So as you understand your organization's changes and desires for supporting mobility and potentially initiatives for some cost savings as a result of COVID-19, you may find the need to change some of your program. It may be a process that you change, it may be a procedure that you change, it may be a policy, or it may be a component within a policy that you may change. And then you may also find that you're changing support at the file level. So you may have, for example, a long-term assignment policy that offers 30 days of temporary living, but now going forward due to COVID-19, you're going to understand that individuals may need anywhere between 60 and 90 days for the locations that you're going to, so you're going to change your policy component for that particular person. So important to kind of think about your programs and how you might modify your programs. You might also take the time now to think about efficiencies of your programs. Many programs initially may not have had sections that talked a lot about what happens when we have to evacuate. What are the important documents that you need to have in your possession before you go on assignment? Powers of attorneys, wills, if you have children, who takes care of the children if you become ill? Unfortunately, COVID-19 presented some situations where employees were not prepared. They did not have the proper paperwork ready. They didn't understand the organization's evacuation procedures, and they were not necessarily as have as much clarity as far as some of the health insurance benefits. So we have seen some organizations go back and update their policies for further clarifications for some of those pieces, so that employees, as they start to go forward in the future, are a little bit more prepared, and some of the support that organizations are going to provide differently or have already been providing that didn't have visibility are now more visible in policy documents. So again, the duration of those changes, it's important to understand whether they are short-term, long-term, or permanent changes to a program. And then any changes that you do make to your program need to be documented. So whether it's internal resources that the mobility team use, talent, HR, those need to be updated. Any stakeholder impacted documents would need to be updated. Any employee-facing documents, so those would be policy documents, addendums, it could be letters of assignment, relocation agreements, all of those documents would need to be addressed with any of the changes, as well as the vendors would need to understand the changes. Many times vendors will have that touch your employees have documents that specifically speak to your programs, and any changes in your programs would need to be reflected in their documents as well, and they will need to update their training documents so that their teams are most up to date on any of the changes for your programs. So when we look back at our polling questions, we have, let's see, we have 28 of companies have not provided any changes. We have 22% have put temporary changes in place. 9% have done long-term changes. Only 5% have provided permanent changes, and 16% are still taking a look at their programs to see if there are any changes that they would like to implement. Whatever changes you do make, it's really important that you have a communication plan and a change management perspective to make sure that individuals are aware of those changes. But it does start off with the mobility group, understanding the impacts of those changes, defining the impacted populations that would need to be aware of those changes, and then creating a strategy around the communication so that the communication is really clear and it's timely and it's going to the right people. And you already know who your stakeholders were before COVID-19, but after we have entered COVID-19, you may have different stakeholders internally and externally, or you may have different point people within those different departments. So it's also a really good time just to reassess who those stakeholders are, and do you have the right people still in place so that when you do cascade out that information, you're making sure that you hit the right groups and they get it timely and it's not stuck because we didn't have the right person identified to receive that communication. The last part of mobility readiness that we want to take a look at is location readiness. And so when you're looking at the location itself, there may be considerations that are both on the departure location and the destination location that will make a big difference as far as whether or not you can start to mobilize people. The business may be ready, the employee may be ready, mobility team may be ready, and the vendors might be ready, but the location might not be ready for you. So when you take a look at the departure location, you can get really granular with some of the assessment, taking a look at, social distancing rules, health and safety guidelines. Is there the ability to travel in that location? Can you pack up household goods and move them? Can you close out your departure housing? Can you do things like terminate your lease or sell your home? Can you cancel your utilities easily? Can you do a final walkthrough and key handover with a landlord? And then if you have children, can you collect the academic documents that you need? So if you can't achieve some of those key pieces, you may want to reconsider whether or not that departure location is ready to have people move from. When you look at your destination location, you're definitely going to have immigration requirements. You're going to have quarantine requirements upon arrival, potentially. You're going to have the same social distancing and health and safety guidelines to consider. And then you may have to take a look at how temporary housing is secured. Can you secure it? What kinds of housing are available? And how easy or hard is it to secure permanent housing in the destination? And then can you set up utilities? Can you get your driver's license? Can you do local registrations? There are some locations where some of that's working really nicely, and you have some locations where you can't do it at all. And then you have locations where they have modified processes in place. So you'll really need to get to the granular level with your vendors to understand what can and cannot be done, so that if you do pull the trigger to remobilize someone, you're not going to run into execution problems as you begin the process. When you're looking at location readiness, you're also looking at your mobility partners in relation to the location. You really want to take a look at the capabilities of your vendor to evaluate their capacity to handle the volume that you might be pushing through their organization. So that's where the communication with the vendor becomes really important, so that they understand how you're strategizing and prioritizing moves, so that for key locations, they are ready for you on the ground to provide support. Again, understanding that some of the partners, may have some different ways that they're delivering services, but it's still available for that. But also remember, some of your partners may be internal, in-house partners. You may not have everything outsourced. So you'll want to consider as well how you communicate with potentially like compensation and benefits, and have strategies to align with them as well to provide services when you do present moves going through your remobilization. And then you also have to consider model changes. Again, understanding if you've changed processes, procedures, policies, the support that you're providing an individual employee, that's on the ground support that we need to make sure that that mobility partner on the ground is trained and understands what those new changes or those new rules might be. So when it all comes down to location readiness, it really comes back to health and safety. And your organization's really going to look to mobility to help them understand some of the risks and some of the readiness capabilities of locations, and helping them understand if the organization is ready to start to deploy talent. So it's really going to be key for you to continue to work and leverage your resources. So that's your immigration providers, that's your tax provider, it's your ERC organization on their website with all their materials that help you. It's your RMCs, and it's your other relocation partners as well. And they're all gathering lots of information for you to help provide you the data that you need to understand if you can mobilize talent. So you are going to continue to see a lot of questionnaires and a lot of data gathering as part of the process with all of these different providers to help provide that information to you. And SERVA is also trying to continue to gather that information on how COVID-19 can impact programs and volumes. And we do have a survey open today that we would love for you to participate in if you can. If you just go to serva.com, you can access that. But again, the more that you participate in surveys and data gathering, it allows your providers to provide you with more insight and more guidance on how to better execute your programs. So what is the right approach to remobilization? There really is no one right answer or one size fits all. It can be a global approach where you roll it out globally. You can roll it out by country, by region, by city, by office building that you're going into, or you can do a phased approach. It really is up to your organization and its goals and the criticalness of moving talent. And it's up to mobility to have the tools and information to have those strategic conversations with the business lines and HR and senior management to provide the best approaches so that when the trigger is pulled to mobilize talent, you're ready to go, your vendors are ready to go, and you can support those initiatives. So as we look to close out our session here and looking forward, we'd just like to remind you that your success is really leveraging the expertise of your mobility partners, having frequent communication with your stakeholders, proactively preparing for what lies ahead and not waiting till it starts to prepare for it, and really maximizing this time for the opportunity to create efficiencies within your program. So with that, that takes us to the end of our presentation today, which takes us to an opportunity for folks to take a look at some of the questions that we might have collected alongside our...
Yeah. Thank you very much, Kathy, for an excellent presentation. Just a reminder to those online, please type your questions into the Q&A box, which is located in the lower right-hand side of your screen. We'll go ahead and get started. Let's see. Have you, I guess this sort of kind of triggers off of that last polling question. Have you seen many companies change their policies as a result of COVID?
That's a good question. We haven't seen a lot of companies change their formal policies as far as changing benefits. We've seen a lot of cleanup in policies as far as adding like additional sections for like the important documents I mentioned earlier, like wills and powers of attorney, things like that. Some companies didn't have sections in their policies that talked about evacuation, SOS, what to do, how do you communicate that. Some companies have really good security departments, so when someone goes on assignment, they get a good security briefing when they go to their destination location, that if something should happen, what should they do, how should they call. Some companies didn't have that. So I think as a result of COVID, when it first broke and people had to start implementing their critical crisis plans, they found some worked really well and some had gaps, and some felt that they should put some of that information in some of their policies. What we have seen are a lot of companies creating operational guidance documents for operations teams that when employees need additional benefits like temporary living or a trip here or some additional funds for example, COVID tests and things like that, or they have to go into quarantine. We have seen some operational documents created for operations teams to be able to move quickly to approve costs and provide services. So rather than changing policies necessarily, there's just more visibility to services and costs and providing a clear way for teams to provide that support quickly without having to come back into the organization for approvals.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. I'm looking over here, and I don't think I see any other questions. So I'll go ahead and close this out, and thank you again very much for sharing your insights with us today. I would also like to offer a very special thank you to Server Worldwide Relocation and Moving for their sponsorship of this webinar. You all have been a great audience. I hope you've enjoyed the program. Watch your emails later on for a link to the course evaluation and to the page where you can access the handout and recording of this session. It will come to you from messenger@webex.com. Thank you again. Have a great day, and you may now disconnect.